I go. Happy Sunday. We hope you are well. Hope you're doing very well. Hope you are reaching your highest level of mental, physical, and spiritual strength. To all family, friends, comrades, and enemies, we welcome you to this week's edition of our Ancestors' Voices, a weekly program sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And our topic today is, was Kwame Nkrumah assassinated? Was Kwame Nkrumah assassinated? Nkrumah was clearly a leading figure in the revolutionary Pan-Africanist movement. And by revolutionary, we mean the work to bring about the fulfillment of one unified socialist Africa, the elimination of neocolonialism, the definite worldwide struggle against the international capitalist and imperialist network. Nkrumah was a leading force in that struggle. And the official version of what happened to Nkrumah in 1972 is that he died of prostate cancer, but we're going to raise questions around that today based on factual events that we know happened during that time. So we thank you for joining us. We give honor and respect, as always, to the indigenous folks of the Western Hemisphere, the people who rightfully belong here, the people who are fighting for their self-determination and their land back. These lands belong to them. Doesn't matter how often or how long people try to dismiss that, it doesn't refute that reality. So we hope that they are feeling positive and determined to fight today and continue their struggle to get their lands back. And we, of course, give honor to our African ancestors, of which none stood any taller than Kwame Nkrumah. And we honor Kwame Nkrumah and all of our ancestors who were willing to sacrifice their lives so that us as a people can have a better way of existence. So we honor that. And again, we thank you for joining us today. And we will go ahead and get started with our introductions for the program that we are putting in place today. And as we say every week, our Ancestors' Voices is sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party, or the AAPRP. And the AAPRP is a revolutionary, independent, mass Pan-African political party, which is based at home in Africa. We believe that every person of African descent is an African and belongs to the African nation. That's objective. It doesn't matter whether you want to be or not. It doesn't matter whether you know that you are or not, or any of that. It's just an objective historical truth and a political reality. Now, don't get confused. That doesn't mean if you see yourself as anti-African that we want you to be a part of this work. If you're not willing to open your mind, if you live in the US and you hate Africa, then please stay here and be the best American slave that you can possibly be. But for those who are understanding of who we are and what has happened to them, we see Pan-Africanism defined correctly as one unified socialist Africa as the correct solution to empower African people all over the world and address the problems that we have because of who is in control of all of the world's resources, the international capitalist and imperialist network. Not our friends. We want to see them destroyed. And our work to achieve Pan-Africanism is outlined in Nkrumah's Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare. If you're looking at our screen, you see a picture of the cover. And this book lays out our strategy of uniting all of the revolutionary Pan-African formations on the ground throughout the African continent who agree with the definition of Pan-Africanism as one unified socialist Africa. And there are millions of people who fall within this category, and we have relationships and connections with them, and we're building on that every single day so we can create this worldwide fighting force that will deliver us to freedom and liberation. And our Ancestors' Voices is just one of many programs sponsored by the AAPRP on a weekly basis. And this particular program is hosted by myself, Ajamu, and my biological and ideological daughter, Shakura, who both of us are active organizers within the All African People's Revolutionary Party. So to get us started, I will turn it over to Shakura.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you. Greetings, everyone. We hope you are doing well. And we hope that you are maintaining your best physical, mental, spiritual self as you can. We understand that talking about Nkrumah today may be really exciting for some, and for others, it may be very informative. And we are very happy that all folks are here, those who are already familiar with Kwame Nkrumah and those who know nothing about this amazing comrade that walked the planet and was able to contribute so much for African people everywhere. I just want to start by saying that he understood very clearly that Africans everywhere deserve to have a better life than the life that he witnessed us having. He lived in different countries around the world and he saw patterns of how we were being treated the same, no matter where the location was. He saw that we all suffered from poverty. He saw that we all had chronic health issues. He saw that we all were suffering from police brutality, systemic oppression, and other forms of mistreatment. He saw that the problem was not originating in the diaspora, but actually was a direct outcome of colonialism, imperialism, and white supremacy. And he decided that the best way for us to combat, those systems would be A, for us to get educated so that we as a people can figure out how to organize. And so he understood that that started with, of course, joining an organization that's working for justice. But more than that, he wanted to educate himself. And that's what took him on the journey where he started organizing. And it was when he started organizing that he was invited to go to these different conferences. I'm citing his experiences that he talks about in his book, Ghana. And if you have not read that book, I would strongly, strongly, strongly recommend you read it, because that book, along with others that I'm familiar that he has read, he has such a delicate and simple way of writing to where if you consider yourself an intellectual, you would definitely understand what he's saying. But even if you don't consider yourself an intellectual, you would still understand what he's saying, because he didn't need to, express or front like he was super, super smart using different words that we may not all understand. He just had a very simplistic, gentle way of writing. And he was humorous in his own way as well. And so I remember him talking about how he understood that he needed to become educated as soon as possible. And as I said before, it was through that lifestyle choice, through those choices that he made, going to these different institutions to earn these degrees and being exposed to different people along the way who were teaching him more and more about the conditions of African people. His legacy determined that he was considered the father of Pan-Africanism. And it's because of him that we can thank so many others who have come after him and been impacted by him. Kwame Nkrumah was a mentor to Sekou Touré. He was also a mentor to Patrice Lumumba, Amilcar Cabral. Well, Amilcar Cabral and Sekou Touré are contributing factors to how the All African People's Revolutionary Party follows their ideologies. It is these three members, Nkrumah, Sekou Touré, and Amilcar Cabral, that determine our ideology as people. So we are Nkrumahs, Touréis, and Cabralis. And it's because of these three individuals and their contributions to helping Africa to become free from colonizers, imperialists, anyone who's trying to exploit the people and the resources. And so we're trying to show the connection between how Nkrumah was impacting these folks. So it would make sense that they would tend to think similarly and that they would work together collectively and that they would try their best in every aspect that they could to try to change the conditions of the continent before their time came to an end. But it doesn't stop there. Nkrumah was also a mentor to Malcolm X. And Malcolm X started talking later in his life about how he was starting to see the connections of the problems that were taking place on the continent and how those problems were still mirrored in comparison to Harlem and in comparison to Miami and Memphis and other parts of the US. And again, Malcolm was taken too soon as well, but you can start to see a pattern of how folks are starting to go home to the continent. They're meeting Kwame Nkrumah if they had the chance before he died. And then they're in a position where they're starting to change how they think because they're not just thinking from a diasporic standpoint and from a frame that's diasporic. They're thinking from a collective world where they're understanding that these problems are existing around the world for African people. So the best way to fix these problems globally is to start with the continent because that's where the problem started, right? We can also say that Martin Luther King was influenced by Nkrumah, Kwame Ture, formerly known as Stokely Carmichael, and pretty much any Pan-Africanist that you would argue is a Pan-Africanist today. I also wanted to add, some of our femme presenting folks that we may even not know their names, but I can definitely think of Shirley Graham Du Bois. And she was still determining, what her Pan-Africanist lens looked like, but she was very clear that Nkrumah had something to offer. She also was very clear that Nkrumah had a love for African people. And if memory serves me, I want to say Comrade Ajamu has mentioned before that Shirley Graham Du Bois was able to run one of the radio programs that was broadcasting out of Ghana with the help of Nkrumah because she was trying to do her part once she had that epiphany of understanding this is bigger than just Africans in the US. This is bigger than Africans in Canada. We as a people, as a collective people, need to understand that our problems are global and they all start because of the exploitation of Africa. It's very, very simple. It is very simple. Because Africa is exploited, African people are not respected. It's very simple. And so then if we understand that, then we understand, like Nkrumah, so we need to help Africa not be exploited anymore. That is the best way that we can go about doing that. And so I will just say this, and then I can move to the next slide. I just love how Nkrumah in Ghana, he talks about how he grew up poor. He talks about that. He talks about the struggles that he had. I remember he was giving some very specific descriptions about how painful his feet were because he had outgrown the shoes that he was wearing and he could not afford to get new shoes. He struggled to pay for all of his schooling. Every single class that he took, he struggled to pay for it. And I remembered him talking about how he was looking for a place that to provide a roof over his head when he was, I think, working as a journalist in London, if I'm not mistaken. And he was living at some place and he couldn't afford the room and board. Well, the room, I should say. So he was able to barter with the person in charge of the building, where he was able to work as a dishwasher. And in exchange for his labor of washing dishes, that's how he was able to pay for his room. And so I really appreciate his humility. And we see that across the board too. We saw that when Comrade Ajamu was talking about some stories of Kwame Ture and how he would come to different events in Sacramento and how he always had, I think you described it as a very old fashioned watch. And in terms of like the work that he was doing and how he was this international speaker, he clearly could have afforded a more expensive looking watch or whatnot. But I'm saying that to say this point of we're seeing how these are different connections of folks that are truly, truly humanists at the heart of it all. They truly care about people being better. And if I had a chance to sit down with both of them, I think that they both would argue that yes, they want Africa to be free. Yes, they want African people to not be exploited and to be respected. But I think they both would understand that we need to change the conditions of the world so that no person is oppressed. Because as King said it, a threat to injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So we really need to eradicate all systems of oppression, not just those that are exploiting Africa. This is why we're constantly talking about how we need to be in connection with understanding that colonized people everywhere, they need our support. They need our labor. They need our help so that we can fight their fight with them and they can hopefully fight our fight with us. This is why we're constantly talking about how occupied Palestine, Palestinians deserve their land back. We're constantly talking about how indigenous people deserve their land back. We are constantly talking about how Irish people deserve their land back. Asian descent people deserve their land back. And if a person is not colonized, we're talking about the oppressions that our LGBTQ comrades are facing. We talk about the oppression that femme people are facing with patriarchy. We talk about the oppression that different able people are facing if they are suffering from ableism. We talk about xenophobia. We talk about Islamophobia. We have all of these systems, you all, that are dehumanizing and tearing people up to where they are dying from either physical violence and brutality, or the stress of enduring it is causing them to have biologically medical issues. There is seriously something wrong with the system that we live in because people don't matter, specifically people who are poor. They do not matter. And I do not want to live in a world where how much money I make determines how people treat me. That is not okay by any means necessary, because at the end of the day, the people who are working, who are struggling, they're not in a position where they can ask to make all this money. So therefore, that means that the people who are always making more money are always going to be treated better. And the people who are never going to make enough money are always going to be treated negatively. What kind of sense does that make? And it's a system that sets up people to fail. That is not right by any means necessary. This is why classism is the main system of oppression. That has got to go. It has got to go. It is not serving any of us well. It is not doing well for us. It is not helping us in any way. Just thinking about it makes my stomach curl up, and I feel very sick thinking about how badly people are mistreated just because they are poor. That is not their fault. This is a system that is set up for you to fail unless you were already born with a silver spoon in your mouth. How fair is that? So these are the things that we have to think about. And I remember Nkrumah talking about how much pain he was in walking because he couldn't afford shoes. And I think about his dedication. I think about his principles. I think about his humanism. I think about how he didn't complain. I think about how he was dedicated and he just kept telling himself, I'm here to get the program finished. I'm here to get this degree. I can't really worry about getting new shoes right now. And just thinking about how disciplined he was, thinking about how he understood he had a responsibility. He was determined to get as much education as he could so he could take that information, go back to the continent, and figure out how we can work with agricultural farmers to figure out ways to sell the cacao for a profit so that the whole continent, not just Ghana, so that the whole so the whole continent could benefit from that profit. He was determined to figure out ways to work with agricultural farmers so that we could figure out irrigation systems for water and whatnot. He even had some ideas on how to deal with the gold, hence why it was called the Gold Coast. And so I'm just saying this to say it's a fascinating book. And in doing all of this work, he started joining organizations very young on when he was trying to finish his degrees so that he could start to get more exposure. He started writing for different agencies that were broadcasting newsletters and whatnot. And that's how he started to get more information, not just through the world, about what the problems were that Africans were facing, but also ways that we could figure out ways to address them. And so, again, we ask you to use whatever your skill set is to help advance the mass struggle of people everywhere. If you're really good at technology, we could sure use your help with organizing Excel spreadsheets or figuring out the fastest way to get someone to update their information, figuring out ways that we can collect data and archive it. If you're really good at educating people, maybe you can help us write some new plays or new poems so that we can find ways to enlighten people at events and help get them interested in joining an organization that's working for justice. If you're really good at talking, we always are looking for new people to join our events and to be speakers. But we want people who are speaking because they're in organizations that are working for justice. We can't just have you come off the street and speak because we need to make sure that your foundation is rooted in helping humanity to become better and stronger. And hopefully that means that you have experience working with other people so that you can, from a social justice standpoint, have the best way of going about doing that. And we ask that you continue to think about other ways that you can contribute to make this world a better place, but also to help advance the struggles of people everywhere. Next slide, please. We all have a responsibility towards that, you all, and we're going to keep saying it time and time again. So we definitely would encourage you to join an organization that is working for justice. If that just simply doesn't work for you, then maybe you can help support us financially, because this work that we're doing is very expensive. It's very expensive to fly comrades around the world, but yet that's what we're doing because we're trying to make sure that our comrades have an interconnection going on so that we can hear from comrades that are doing work in Burkina Faso, so that we can hear from comrades that are doing work in Ghana, so that comrades that are doing work in Oakland can go to Ghana. We had a comrade just recently, we talked about our comrade Anem who came from Burkina Faso and spoke in Oakland. We also had a comrade from Ghana who came to the Bay Area and spoke. And we had a comrade who's in work study in Canada that's in Ghana right now, or maybe is leaving in a couple of days, but has been there a whole month just so that they can have more exposure at home on the continent of what organizing looks like for us. So these things are very connected in how we're doing what we're doing. And so, we're asking you all to help us support, because we may not be personally funding all of these folks' travel situations, but we're trying to make sure that every African gets home, because that is most important. And if you're in an organization that's working for justice, you definitely should try to get back to the land that was stolen so that you can organize on that space and truly understand what it is you're fighting for. I mean, there's no better feeling than understanding why you're doing what you're doing, because you're in the space that you can actually call home for real, like authentically call home. And if Africa is not your home, then I suggest you get back to what you call home so that you can have that experience. So if we continue on, we can just think more about Nkrumah's legacy and what that really looked like. And I was hinting to this in the previous slide, but Nkrumah was one of the founders of the same organization that is giving you this broadcast right now. Without Nkrumah, we may not be talking about the same things. We may not have the same logos on our broadcast, and we may not even be doing a broadcast, because he influenced us to understand that we needed to reach people everywhere. I just said that, or tried to, in the previous slide, about how he was printing out articles. He was writing for different news companies, different newspaper companies, so that the messages could get out. And of course, they were having them translated in different languages so that people have more information about updates that were happening to Africans everywhere, events that were taking place, organizations, summits, different conferences that were happening, so that folks could start to go and start to learn more about what was happening. And he was intentionally trying to get the word out to Africans everywhere, but specifically in the diaspora, so that they could understand at home on the continent what was happening, because he knew there was a strong disconnect there. And so we can thank Nkrumah for that. Now, he wasn't the only founder of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, but he was one of the mains. And without him, like I said, we wouldn't be here today. And we certainly wouldn't have the ideology that we have. So we can thank him for that, and thank him for his passion for wanting to help make things better. We can thank him for wanting the world to be a better place and understanding that Africa was a core reality and allowing that goal to be met. We appreciate his love for African people, but we also appreciate his love for the African nation and how he wanted Africans everywhere to feel comfortable being African. One of my favorite quotes by Nkrumah, because I have many, is that he says, any African anywhere belongs to the African nation. So even if you don't understand that you're African, Nkrumah understood. And I just think that's so important, because for a lot of us, we have loss of identity and we're not interested in correcting it. We're not interested in fixing it. We're not interested in adapting it. We're not interested in being open to the idea that it's okay if we don't accept American. It's okay. We're not open to that idea, but we need to be, because the reality is we are African, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing to be ashamed of that. But you would have to really have a deep understanding of who you are to know that that's not something to be ashamed of. You would have had to go back home to experience it. And you would have had to understand that being in an organization that's working for justice allows you to be connected to your identity more and more each time. And I am privileged to say that I did go back home twice. I'm privileged to say that I am in an organization that's working for justice. And I'm privileged to say that I understand how important it is to know who I am, because I am under attack every day with the same systems of oppression that we just talked about. Don't you see? Being in an organization working for justice is your armor. Do you get it? Like, that's where that comes from. That's your protection right there. Because this system is designed to tear you down. Every day it is designed to tear you down. But if you join an organization that's working for justice, you have less a chance of being attacked, and it actually sticking. Because if you're in an organization that's working for justice, you're motivated and you're reminded of why you're doing the work. And Nkrumah understood that. And he wrote several books to express that he understood that. From Positive Action to Revolutionary Warfare, Nkrumah is one of the most pronounced figures of the 20th century. And I expressed my appreciation for Ghana early on, but I also should point out that was one of my first readings that I did to introduce me to the All African People's Revolutionary Party. I literally joined work study while they were reading Ghana, and I can't tell you how great that book was to make me feel welcomed as I was coming into this work. I also coupled reading Ghana with a guide for organizing defense against white supremacy, patriarchal, and fascist violence. And I was really appreciative of how well the two books were related and connected in the dots. Because as we know, Comrade Ajamu wrote a guide for organizing defense against white supremacy, patriarchal, and fascist violence. And it was a updated manifesto, if you will, of the book you see on the screen now, Revolutionary Warfare by Kwame Nkrumah. And so there were a lot of things that were mentioned in Comrade Ajamu's book that I kind of saw when I was reading Ghana. But of course, the two books were written at a completely different time in history, or her history, or their history. So it was interesting for me to still pick up on those things and be able to connect the dots that Nkrumah had said so many years ago, and now Comrade Ajamu is saying now, right? And so even though I haven't read Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare yet, I'm grateful for being able to have read a guide for organizing defense, because I'm in a better position to understand where we are today versus where we were when he wrote the book. And the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare is called the Handbook for a reason. It is literally the what do you call it? The blueprint. It is literally the blueprint for starting an organization that's working for justice, and more importantly, for starting a collective coalition, if you will, of how to organize with different organizations. He literally wrote the steps, that we would need to achieve one unified socialist Africa. He wrote down how to build our military. He wrote down how to develop our economic system. He wrote down the importance of different organizations working together. And he had different terms for what he called them so that we would understand, okay, we should put all these organizations together and they would be under the umbrella where all of these organizations are working to achieve a free Africa. And so even if they're different organizations and they have different people in them who might think a little bit differently, the number one goal is that every single one of these organizations wants Africa to be free. I mean, that kind of organization right there is how you maintain socialism. Sometimes it's not as important as how you get it versus how you maintain it, because the oppressor is going to come back and try to change the system up again. So I just really appreciate being able to couple those two books together, and being able to read them helps me to have more appreciation and excitement for being able to understand that when I do read a handbook, when I do read Revolutionary Warfare Handbook, I'm sorry, I'm freezing up a little bit. But just my point before I close, when I do read that, I'm in a better position to be more prepared, because I've been able to look at the updated copy so that now I can understand what to expect, but also so that I can use what's updated and also learn from what has already been written. So we encourage you to join an organization. We appreciate your time. We thank you so much. And let's continue to speak Nkrumah's name and legacy into our hearts and our minds, and let's learn and grow from him. Ashe.
Ashe, obrigada. And before I move to the next slide, I just wanted to reiterate what we're saying about the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, the book on the screen, if you're looking at a screen, that Nkrumah wrote in 1968 when he was in Guinea-Conakry. And words matter, so I just want to make sure we're clear, right? Like, Nkrumah was without question a main founder of the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And if you have read, or you should read, the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare there on the screen, between pages 56 and 60 is where he literally, in exact words, calls for the creation of an All-African People's Revolutionary Party. And the reason why he does that, which he explains in great detail in the book, is because originally Nkrumah was one of the founders, along with Haile Selassie from Ethiopia, of the Organization of African Unity, which today is the African Union. And the purpose of that organization in 1963 was supposedly to bring about African unity. But the Organization of African Unity, or the African Union, or the OAU, or the AU, their charter says that each country has to respect the integrity and sovereignty of every country within Africa. So this is a strategy of imperialism. In other words, you could see that we are doing everything to sabotage our people. In Rwanda, you're in neighboring Uganda. There's nothing you can do about that because you have to respect the sovereignty that we have. This is a colonizer mentality. So Nkrumah realized this, that the Organization of African Unity then and the African Union today would never be the vehicle to bring about true liberation for the African masses. And so this is the reason that he wrote the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare. And instead of the OAU or the AU, which united countries based on at the government level, he called for the creation of the All-African Committee for Political Coordination, or AACPC, which would be the central committee members of all of the revolutionary Pan-African formations on the ground in Africa. Not a coalition, because a coalition is when you unite with organizations that represent different movements. We're all in the same movement. We're all fighting for one unified socialist Africa, whether it's the PAIGC from Guinea-Bissau, the PAC from Azania, South Africa, the Amilcar Cabral Ideological School in Nigeria, the Pan-African Union of Sierra Leone. Those are the logos on the screen here, or any of the many others that exist. We are all fighting for the same thing. So the idea Nkrumah had is that all of these organizations would have members represent the Central Committee of the All-African Committee for Political Coordination. And once that was in place, that would be the All-African People's Revolutionary Party. This is why we always say we're building the AAPRP. We never say that it's built, because we're in the process of putting all of these building blocks together. And the final piece of that is the creation of the All-African People's Revolutionary Army, whose purpose would be to wage the liberation war, to run these capitalists and these imperialists out of Africa and out of the African world. So I just thought it was important to clarify that, because we don't get to talk about our work as often as we want to. And so that gives us the opportunity to do that. So let's just start with my section by saying, why would imperialism want to murder Kwame Nkrumah? Because we're saying the purpose of this session today is, was Kwame Nkrumah assassinated? And we know that Nkrumah died on April 27th, 1972. He was in Romania in Eastern Europe, which at that time was a country, one of the member countries of what they called the Eastern Bloc in the Warsaw Pact, led by the Soviet Union, right? And Nkrumah went there for medical attention. The official version of why he died was that he had prostate cancer, and it was prostate cancer that killed him. And that's what we'll be talking about in the remaining few minutes that we have left here. But where we want to start with this discussion, why would imperialism want to murder Kwame Nkrumah, is you have to look at Nkrumah's body of work, like in Shakura reference. You have to look at what did Nkrumah do. And I think that if you go back to the independence of Ghana on March 6, 1957, Nkrumah made it clear that we're not just trying to make Ghana independent. We're not just trying to make Africa independent of European colonialism. We want to make Africa free. We want Africa to be liberated. That means understanding that not only do the Europeans have to physically leave Africa, which was the end of colonialism, we have to change the political and economic systems. We have to get rid of capitalism, which has been built on the exploitation of Africa and African people for the last several centuries. So Nkrumah understood we got to get rid of capitalism, and it's got to be replaced by something better, which is scientific socialism. And he also understood that the unification of Africa was necessary because Africa, as we know it today, was created by European colonialism. So clearly that's never going to be the vehicle that's going to give us the liberation that we need. Every African paying attention, listening to this broadcast right now, wherever you are in the world, and whatever is happening wherever you are, is the direct result of European imperialism, colonization, and the exploitation of Africa. I don't care where you live. It is irrefutable that that's the reason why you're there. You can put on whatever kind of fake identity you want to. You can call yourself whatever the hell you want to try to call yourself. You cannot refute what I just said. And all of you that are spending all this money getting these European DNA tests, even those dumbass tests are telling you that what I'm saying is true. So Nkrumah understood this clearly, without question. And so when Ghana became independent, his mission was to immediately use that independence to work towards the furtherance of self-determination for all of Africa. And so one of his first things that happened there was the All-African People's Conference in Ghana in 1958. And this conference attracted African revolutionaries, people like George Padmore from Trinidad, people like Frantz Fanon, who was from Martinique in the Caribbean, but was a part of the Algerian Revolution in the late 50s and early 60s. People like Patrice Lumumba, which is where Kwame Nkrumah and Patrice Lumumba met. And it was there that Lumumba was so impressed with Nkrumah's vision and his work that he instantly became someone who wanted to listen and learn from Nkrumah and became a mentor, a mentee of Kwame Nkrumah until Lumumba's assassination in January of 1961. It was Sekou Touré, of course, was there. And all of these folks were there. And Nkrumah began to use the All-African People's Conference to epitomize the need for African liberation to take place on a continental level. And from there, we have the Congo and the crisis that I just mentioned, where Lumumba, leading the National Congolese movement, was leading the Congo to independence from Belgium and European and US imperialism. And once that was known, Nkrumah was Lumumba and the Congolese people's chief ally in the Congolese crisis at that time. There's no question. I don't care what anybody says. I'm happy to show them where they're wrong and don't know what the hell they're talking about. But is no question in my mind that Patrice Lumumba only lived as long as he did because of the support he had from Kwame Nkrumah. It was the Ghanaian military forces that were in the Congo as a part of the United Nations forces that prevented Mobutu's people. Mobutu was the military leader of the Congolese military, which was firmly in the grip of the Central Intelligence Agency, criminals in action. And they were trying to assassinate Lumumba as early as the fall of 1960. And it was only because of the Ghanaian and the Guinean troops who were sent there by Sekou Touré as well that protected Lumumba and allowed him to live as long as he did. And we did a workshop on this. So if you know the history, you know that Lumumba was in a house and he decided to sneak out of the house because he wanted to address the people. But once he did that, he no longer had the protection of these Ghanaian and Guinean troops. Maybe they could have kept him alive, but he snuck out of the house. And when he did that, that's when Mobutu's people captured him and killed him. So the forces of imperialism understood from what happened in the Congo that Kwame Nkrumah was going to be a problem for them, whether it was in Ghana or any other part of Africa or any other part of the world, because they paid attention. They saw Nkrumah in Harlem, New York in 1960, the picture at the top of your screen, where he made firmed up his relationship with El Hajj Malik El Shabazz, Malcolm X. Malcolm X didn't just go to Ghana. Well, I don't want to deal with Elijah Muhammad anymore. I guess what will I do? Well, I guess I'll go to Ghana. That's what that's what you would think if you base what you know on Malcolm X off of that dumbass movie that Spike Lee did and not read anything, not read any of the history, then you'll be confused and that's what you'll think. But the reality is that this relationship was established much long before 1964, when Malcolm finally went to Ghana. It was established with meetings like this in Harlem, where they met and Malcolm began to be enamored with the political action of Kwame Nkrumah, but he was still in the Nation of Islam then, and Elijah Muhammad wasn't trying to be no revolutionary. You can get mad at me for saying that, but it's irrefutable. He wasn't. I'm not that Elijah Muhammad made a contribution to our people, but he was not trying to be a revolutionary and overthrow capitalism and imperialism. And if you argue with that, you're out of your god. You just don't know what the hell you're talking about. So Malcolm could not publicly talk about his much more radical and revolutionary interests that he had than what the Nation of Islam was offering, but he still developed those relationships. That's why he met with Fidel Castro when Castro came to Harlem in 1960. Why would he do? What would Fidel Castro and the Cuban Revolution contribute to the program of the Nation of Islam? I mean, some people out here might be dumb as hell, but not all of us are that dumb. So we know why these things happened the way they did. In 1965, Nkrumah hosted Ernesto Che Guevara in Ghana for 2 weeks. And they solidified that revolutionary relationship. We know who Che Guevara does. We don't give a damn. I mentioned this before. Some clown, Che Guevara shot my father in the face. And I told him, you don't know who you're talking. I don't give a damn. Your father probably needed to be shot in the face if that happened. We know who this man was. He did everything to help our people. If you don't know it, that's your damn problem. You know, I looked at his profile picture, white as the driven storm. I'm like, he probably should have shot him in the face. Probably should have did it before he did it. So this is the type of relationships that Kwame Nkrumah was building and establishing. And then the picture on the bottom is Kwame Nkrumah in Guinea-Conakry with then Stokely Carmichael and Shirley Graham Du Bois, as Shakur mentioned. And Mrs. Du Bois didn't just do a radio program, Shakur and everyone else. She helped start Ghana's first television station that is still on the air today. And I have actually had the honor and privilege of being interviewed on that station when I was in Ghana in 2015 to talk about our work in the All-African People's Revolutionary Party. And once I left Ghana the next day. All the people in the airport, you were on TV last night. You know, it's the most watched station in Ghana, and she helped create it in 1964. So imperialism knew that Nkrumah was a threat. He was building the Akasambo Dam project, which I was able to go visit and see when I was in Ghana last month. And he was able to build that as a method to try to, part of his socialist policies in Ghana, to try to create more electricity self-sufficiency for the people of Ghana. And some of the other projects that Nkrumah put in place in Ghana, the socialist tire factories that existed in places like Takoradi, Ghana, that were outproducing Firestone rubber with producing tires in Ghana, from a socialist model where people were paid more and treated better. They work better. Anyone that knows anything about labor knows that. The better if you treat people like trash, they call in sick, they're not productive. When you respect your workers, they don't call in sick, they work harder. That's what socialism does, you all. And this is what the tire manufacturing process in Ghana was accomplishing. And as a result of that, people were beginning to see this socialism thing really works. And this is what capitalism was afraid of. They were afraid of Nkrumah's principle and honest dignity for Africa and African people, and the fact that he made it clear with his words and his deeds that capitalist imperialist network led by the United States of America was not a friend to Africa and African people, and that we needed to organize against him. And of course, when Nkrumah released his book, Neo-Colonialism, in 1965, which called out that capitalism resulted from the transatlantic slave trade and that the continued exploitation of Africa that colonialism and slavery put in place to exploit Africa's human and material resources is the sole reason that the Western capitalist world is rich, and why Africa is poor, and why Africans everywhere we live on earth are poor. And this was the final nail in the coffin for imperialism. They had to get rid of Kwame Nkrumah. And so we know there are many acknowledged, documented episodes of imperialism attempting to get rid of Kwame Nkrumah. We know that the CIA, Criminals in Action, they have recently, within the last 10 years, have been forced to acknowledge their role in illegally overthrowing Kwame Nkrumah's government in Ghana in 1966. And by illegal, what we mean is that the CIA, working with these coon thugs in Ghana, Ankara and Katoka and Arifra and all of these riffraff and all of these people in Ghana who worked hand in hand with imperialism to undermine Nkrumah's government through misinformation, through lies. They said that Nkrumah was stealing the money from the Ghanaian treasury. And Nkrumah didn't steal a nickel from the Ghanaian treasury. What money he spent was designed to build infrastructure in Ghana. If you go to Ghana, and again, I was just there last month, most of the infrastructure that exists in Ghana today in 2024, this is irrefutable. Anybody listening here that is from Ghana or wherever, you're a puppet for imperialism, whatever the hell your problem is, you cannot refute what I'm about to say. That in 2024, most of the infrastructure that exists in Ghana today was facilitated under Nkrumah's government 60 years ago. There hasn't been all of these goddamn coons that took over for Nkrumah since then haven't developed combined the level of infrastructure development in Ghana that Nkrumah did in the 9 years that he was president of Ghana from 1957 to the early part of 1966. So they wanted to overthrow him, and that's why he ended up in Guinea-Conakry in the invitation of Sékou Touré and the Democratic Party of Guinea. They welcomed Nkrumah there. They wanted to make him president. He refused. Said, I can't be president. They voted for you, Brother Sékou Touré. So they made him co-president. He's the only person in history, human history, to be president of two different countries. And we know that these forces of imperialism wanted Nkrumah gone. Because one clear, irrefutable example of that was in Guinea-Conakry, the PDG and Sékou Touré, they had permitted Amilcar Cabral and the African Party for the Independence of Guinea-Bissau, the PAIGC, to use Guinea-Conakry. That's how we identify them. Guinea-Conakry, Sékou Touré, and the PDG. Guinea-Bissau, Amilcar Cabral, and the PAIGC. Both of them still active revolutionary Pan-Africanist organizations today that we work with every single day. We just had a conference in Guinea-Conakry that was hosted by the Democratic Party of Guinea and other revolutionary Pan-Africanist formations that the APRP participated in. We had people from the APRP there in Guinea, from Guinea-Bissau, from Burkina Faso, from Ghana, from all over Africa. This was just a couple of months ago that this happened. So when Nkrumah was there in Guinea-Conakry, because Sékou Touré and the PDG had invited Cabral to use Guinea-Conakry as a staging location for the PAIGC to mount its military attacks against Portuguese colonialism in Guinea-Bissau, because if you look at a map, Guinea-Bissau borders Guinea-Conakry. That was why on November 22nd, 1970, Portugal invaded Guinea-Conakry with the objective of overthrowing the PDG and Sékou Touré, with the objective of assassinating Amilcar Cabral and destabilizing the PAIGC, and with the objective of assassinating Kwame Nkrumah. Because Nkrumah had, Nkrumah was working, living at Via Sili, was writing books, and that area where he was living was bombed. So clearly they made an attempt to assassinate him, because imperialism sat down and they said, so these are the objectives. Get rid of Sékou Touré. Fortunately, Sékou Touré and his family were able to escape harm. Get rid of Amilcar Cabral. Fortunately, Cabral was not even in Guinea at that time. But as you know, the history, these agents of imperialism were able to get to Cabral and assassinate him in 1973, in December of 1973. They were not able to kill Kwame Nkrumah, but they made every effort to do that. Why would they do that? Because they knew Nkrumah was still the leading force behind Pan-African organization in the African world. He was looked at as the guiding light for Pan-African struggle. He's still looked at that way. And so that's why they wanted to get rid of Kwame Nkrumah when they invaded Guinea in 1970. But the people of Guinea whooped the hell out of the Portuguese, ran them the hell out of Guinea-Conakry on November 22nd, 1970. Ran them the hell out, and those devils didn't try that again because they saw how they got their asses kicked doing that. So this is a reflection of our people's will and desire to be free. We still have it. I don't care if it's the people in Guinea-Conakry kicking the Portuguese out in 1970 or Africans on the streets of LA or Chicago kicking the police out in 2024. It doesn't matter. Our people still have the desire to be free from these people and their systems of oppression. And so that's why we waged the struggle the way we did. And Kwame Nkrumah, for anyone who knows anything about him and his work, will always and forever be an inspiration for that work and that desire. So let's talk about the last couple of years of Nkrumah's life, all right? Because this is hardly ever talked about. And I have to give credit to some of the people who talked about this, right? Like June Milne, or Milne, I'm not 100% sure how to pronounce her name, was a European woman from Britain. And she was Kwame Nkrumah's editor those final years of his life. She is the one that made it her responsibility to ensure that the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare was printed, that Class Struggle in Africa was printed, Neo-Colonialism was printed, Revolutionary Path was printed. All of the works that he did the last several months he was in Ghana and during his time in Guinea-Conakry in Via Sealy, living there, she did that. And one of the books that she put together, and you should read it, it's called The Conakry Years, Letters from Kwame Nkrumah. And that book is letters. And then there's another book by our sister comrade, Dorothea Mbalia, which is also additional letters from Conakry. You should read both books because what they're doing in those books, you all, is they're showing you who was in contact with Kwame Nkrumah and who Kwame Nkrumah was in contact with. If you want to understand his relationship with Kwame Ture as his political secretary, or Stokely Carmichael as he was then, it's all in those letters. The love, affection, and appreciation he had for Secretary, it's all in those letters. And the fact that Nkrumah wrote extensively to people about the atmosphere in Guinea-Conakry at that time and how unsafe it was, and how there were so many people who were trying to sabotage the government of the Democratic Party of Guinea and to overthrow and assassinate Secretary, and how unsafe it was. And, people talk about Secretary, oh, he was a strong man. He put people in Camp Boreal. The majority of those people needed to be taken out because they were trying to sabotage that revolution. And Nkrumah wrote extensively about it. It wasn't anybody's imagination. This was imperialism trying to undermine our efforts to be free. And we needed somebody like Secretary to say, we're going to make an example out of you. I don't care what the hell you think about it, but that's what they did. And I don't have a single issue with it. They should have done it. We need more of that. We definitely need it today. Some of these people that sell our people out as shamelessly as they do, they should be taken out to the beach and laid out there and left there so people could see what happens. If you think that's primitive, then that's your damn problem. I don't care. I'm trying to get us free. And so that's what happened. And Nkrumah wrote about it, that this was the atmosphere. There were so many efforts. Nobody could be trusted. And Secretary talked about this constantly as well. The fifth column in Guinea-Conakry, the people in Guinea who were working for imperialism, working for the CIA, working for them, getting paid by them to sabotage what was happening in the PDG in Guinea-Conakry. And we know that Kwame Nkrumah had the same chef that came to Guinea-Conakry with him from Ghana in February 24th, 1966, all the way through the early 70s. This man cooked every meal that Kwame Nkrumah ate because he was trusted. And Nkrumah was a health nut. And I get that because I'm a damn health nut. He didn't eat all this nasty ass food that people eat all the time. He exercised every day on the beach. And these people, like this June Milne woman that saw him, saw his health suddenly start to deteriorate once his personal chef that I just mentioned mysteriously died in the early part of 1972, mysteriously from reasons unknown. And from that time forward, Nkrumah's health in just a few months deteriorated to unprecedented levels. And she had been coming to see him and could see the urgent deterioration of his health. So that by the time April came, a man who just a few months before that was doing push-ups on the beach, right? This is documented. Now he couldn't even stand up all of a sudden. So do I think that this new person that came in that was from Guinea and was probably one of these fifth column people, most likely, that wasn't dedicated to the African Revolution, was dedicated to serving imperialism, that person over time slowly poisoned Kwame Nkrumah? Well, I can't really prove that, but I know that that's one of the chief methods the CIA does, the M15 does, to kill people that they view to be dangerous to the interests of imperialism. So yeah, I believe that that's what happened. I don't believe he just suddenly, his health just deteriorated. He was only 62 years old. That's how old I am right now. And I'll tell you right now, my health suddenly, I'm in excellent health. If my health suddenly deteriorates, then that's because some other kind of stuff is happening, right? That doesn't just happen out of nowhere. So yes, we think that it's very important that we look at it like Kwame Nkrumah was sabotaged and was sent to his death before it was time, because the more he lived, the more of an inspiration he would be to our struggle for justice and liberation. But the problem imperialism has, the same problem they always have, is they think if they eliminate the person, they eliminate the struggle. And that's because they're stupid as hell. It's like Fred Hampton said, you can kill the revolutionary, you can't kill the revolution. All they did was create millions of Kwame Nkrumahs, millions of Shirley Graham Du Bois's, millions of Amilcar Cabral's and Secretaries and Andre Therese, millions of people like this. That's all they've done, and we're just getting started. So yeah, y'all can kill Kwame Nkrumah, but one day we will have our justice. And when we do it, we'll plant the flag of Kwame Nkrumah in Africa right on your forehead. And so we thank you for joining us today. We ask you to go to the red QR code at the top left of the screen. It'll show you all the AAPRP programs that are taking place. You can go to our Forward Ever shop and you can purchase clothing that gives positive African messages for liberation. We encourage you to do that. hoodcommunist.org. We encourage you to support this independent revolutionary African blog. They're raising money. Go to hoodcommunist.org and contribute money. You should do that. We need independent revolutionary African voices. Betterworld.me, all of these videos are there. You can look them up and share them. And of course, we want to again give honor and respect to our fallen comrade, Sekou Odinga. Rest in power, comrade. We love and appreciate you. Join the All African People's Revolutionary Party. Go to aprp-intl.org and sign up. And next week, we want you to come back for our program, same time, same place, the continued attacks against African women. We are sick of these social media attacks against African women. We don't care who people decide to love, but all of these European women who are on here talking about African women, shut the hell up. So we're going to be talking about all of this next week and talking about how we stand 100% with our African women, our sisters, and we want to support our women and say that we don't go in battle without our women. They stand right beside us, and it'll always be that way. And I think as African men, especially, we need to saw these hoot butt African men on these black women, they don't know how to act. You don't know how to act. You're a little boy. Stand up and be an adult. Stand up stop selling out for a few dollars like a chump. That's what you are. So go to the bottom QR code, support our program in Burkina Faso. We are organizing there, among other places. We'll bring you some of those other places you can support soon. And my book, A Guide for Organized Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. I'm going to be going out of state to do some on-the-ground anti-fascist work. A lot of these people, you know, they wouldn't get within 500 miles of fascists. I will go right up to the fascists because we gotta get rid of them before they get rid of us, right? So all my travel expenses I pay with proceeds from that book, so please support. We thank you all for joining us today. We ask you to come back next week and tell people, enjoy the rest of your Sunday evening. Forward ever, backwards never.